When the network went down, it triggered some kind of pulse, wiped out all our technology, and sent us here, back to the Dark Ages.
Wait, what? This clip from the 2013 movie, The World's End, is indicative of a widespread view of the Middle Ages as dark. The idea of going back to the Dark Ages is a phrase often used to describe a devolution of society. This isn't as big of a deal in fiction, where both intertextuality and references to history don't take themselves too seriously. However, it does become damaging to common perceptions of history when used as an allegorical tool by politicians to describe a threat that is not sufficiently historicized.
That civilization could go backwards and history could go into reverse. The Roman Empire, they weren't expecting it, went into a reverse, and we had a Dark Ages. When the Roman Empire fell, it was largely as a result of uncontrolled immigration, and we went into a Dark Ages, or Europe went into a Dark Ages that lasted a very long time. And so the point of that is to say that it can happen again. People should not be so conceited as to imagine that history is a one-way ratchet.
Boris Johnson clearly has a perception of the Roman Empire as an admirable historical society, the downfall of which led to 4 or 5 centuries being periodized as the intimidating Dark Ages. But what does the term Dark Ages mean? And how do politicians use the Middle Ages as a negative connotation in their speeches and debates? How do perceptions towards classical antiquity contrast with this connotation? These questions and the overarching theme of politicians using such references in their rhetoric are discussed in this video essay. Hi, I'm Roland, and in this video essay my fellow student Gigi and I will be exploring a few examples of the use of history, and will try to compare the way that the medieval era is used in recent political rhetoric compared to the use of antiquity. The Dark Ages as a concept was first coined by Petrarch in the 14th century, and later picked up by Enlightenment thinkers, when especially Protestant academics were trying to distance themselves from the Catholic Church-dominated period in history they felt they had just left. It is intended to insinuate a devolution of civilization after the collapse of the Roman Empire, partially as a result of the corruption of Christianity by the Catholic Church, according to those academics. Jump to today, when the image of the Middle Ages has become so distorted that there is a field of study entitled Medievalisms, which studies the perception of the Middle Ages in the modern day. A number of scholars have looked at speeches and media coverage in response to 9/11 and the declaration of ISIS to demonstrate how the term medieval has become synonymous with barbaric, backwards, primitive, and violent. After 20 years, this perception still pervades in American politics.
We have people, Christians, having their heads cut off in the Middle East. We have all of this, like medieval times, and she said, I didn't like his...
They go into these MS-13 gangs, and these gangs are mean, they're tough, they deal in a medieval style. They cut people up medieval style because it's more painful. These are sick people. We don't want them.
With conducting brutal medieval style killings. You know what medieval style is? Little pieces, medieval style, including the dismemberment of their victims.
Trump's intention is clear. He wants to put an emphasis on what he describes as medieval barbarity that characterizes these killings, and to distance himself from a certain other.
When I called them animals, Nancy Pelosi said, how dare he use that name? These are human beings. I don't think they're human beings.
But the barbarity of these killings is not in any way specific to the Middle Ages. The centuries prior and after the Middle Ages were no less barbaric regarding torture or murder. Therefore, this perception is based more on medievalisms than on medieval history itself. Violence, brutality and torture were in fact not invented in the Middle Ages. By clumping the behavior of the gangs, terrorists and further others as being medieval, so as to almost invalidate their existence in the present, it implies that they don't belong in the present. This delegation of crime and danger to a distant past achieves the goal of villainizing certain groups even further, without addressing the real, modern circumstances and the background that shaped these events and people. Well summed up by the Jason Burke quote. They may be distant in terms of morality or values, but they are not distant in time or place. They do not exist in some kind of other world. Rather, Islamic militancy is fundamentally, profoundly contemporary and modern. Andrew B.R. Elliott describes a similar use of buzzwords of the Middle Ages were used by mainstream media to envision the rise of the Islamic State and the subsequent denunciation by NATO countries as a sort of new crusade. Headlines such as IS is now a medieval threat to our existence and numerous other characterizations of IS as medieval were made by the mainstream media. Once again, if the rhetoric is followed, it poses the danger that people assume the threats are isolated incidents, which it is not. So, if the term medieval and dark ages are used as a synonym for violent and backward, then how is even earlier history considered?
The lives of billions, from antiquity to our own hour, have been shaped by the battle between aspirations of the many and the greed of the few, between people's right to self-determination and the self-seeking of the dictator. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today.
In his speech, Joe Biden makes reference to antiquity in a positive way. The intention is to associate modern-day democracy and the US with the continued struggle for freedom from antiquity and onwards, thus indirectly associating with probably Athenian democracy and a general supposed enlightenment of antiquity.
And to this political pressure, this is a quote that I think people should take to heart. When the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then they ceased to be free. Edith Hamilton, originally Edward Gibbon in The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. When the freedom they wished for most was freedom from responsibility, then they ceased to be free.
In a similar way, Governor Andrew Cuomo quotes Edith Hamilton regarding responsibility in his rhetoric. Even the failures of antiquity were regarded as a source of wisdom. In May of 2021, EU President Charles Michel gave a speech in Athens to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Greece's accession to the EU. In it, he panders quite heavily by attributing the origin of Europe itself to Greece. In his speech in Athens, Charles Michel said the following: "Your ascension to the European community represented a return to the fold for the people of Greece, but the other people of Europe also experienced it as a return to their origins. Europe was born in Greece." He also recounted how he has a figurine of Socrates, which reminds him every day that, quote, "Greece is the cradle of reason, freedom, and democracy," end quote. And apparently, the first things we associate with ancient Greece are thought and democracy. Some very bold and powerful ideas for any one civilization to claim origin over. While the accuracy of these statements may be debatable, they do employ the positive perception of antiquity to strengthen their rhetoric. You don't hear similarly bold statements about the Middle Ages nearly as often, while they arguably contributed just as much in at least ensuring that these ideas reach us in one piece. Biden in particular, in these instances, tries to rouse support by alluding to the supposed ancient side of the struggle against tyranny. Michel suggests a less violent, but equally idyllic idea of antiquity as the start of democratic ideas. Furthermore, by using ancient history in such a positive light, they often treat it in a less harmful way, used as a mark of heritage, or as a historical example in its own right, instead of as a tool for alienation and avoiding accountability. As we have seen, politicians like to use historical terminology in their rhetoric, whether it's historically accurate or not. As a result, certain eras are given the short end of the stick in terms of treatment by politicians, namely the Middle Ages. While the Western world claims ancient origins as its sign of pride, medieval origins are not treated equally, instead used as a cheap synonym for a number of words signifying brutish activity. Not only violence but also injustice and tyranny are often also part of this perception of the Middle Ages employed in rhetoric. The historical periodization of the Middle Ages is sometimes used as a scapegoat for refusing to address real contemporary circumstances that are causing certain phenomena. This is particularly the case with the US politics. Thus, we advise citizens to be wary of the use of historical terms in political speech in general, especially about the Middle Ages, as they can be directly harmful to the perception of not only the historical period in question, but also of those real and contemporary issues being targeted. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. or
I'm gonna get medieval on your ass.